Imagine a world where your haircut is treason and a bird is public enemy number one. Dictators treat nations like personal dollhouses where the rules are written in crayon and enforced by firing squads. We're tracking 48 times history's tyrants stopped ruling and started trolling, proving that nothing is deadlier than a fragile ego with a legislative pen. 1. Kim Jong-il was the world's strictest barber. He launched a campaign titled, "Let us trim our hair in accordance with the socialist lifestyle," allowing only 28 state-approved hairstyles, none of which could match his signature bouffant. Men were restricted to 2 inches of length max. It's the ultimate totalitarian flex. A government so controlling they police your split ends, ensuring that looking good was technically secondary to looking compliant. 2. Robert Mugabe turned Zimbabwe into a legally enforced safe space for his feelings. He criminalized any joke, meme, or grumble directed at the presidency, arresting citizens for something as minor as a sarcastic WhatsApp message. It wasn't about maintaining order, it was about a leader so insecure that he used the full weight of the judicial system to act as his personal moderator, ensuring that no one could point out the obvious fact that he was ruining the place. 3. Turkmenistan's Sapir Murat Niyazov looked at the Gregorian calendar and decided it lacked a certain flavor of him. He renamed January Turkmenbashi, which was his own title, and swapped April for his mother's name. Even September got rebranded to match a book he wrote. It wasn't just ruling a country, it was conquering time itself, ensuring that every time a citizen simply asked, "What day is it?" they were forced to recite a verbal pledge of allegiance to his massive ego. 4. President Hastings Banda ran Malawi like a crotchety grandfather obsessed with the 19th century. He identified the nation's true enemy not as famine or disease, but as the female knee. He criminalized miniskirts, deploying his youth league to harass and humiliate women whose hemlines dared to rise above the approved altitude. It was a bizarre prioritization of resources, effectively declaring a national state of emergency against shins, while the actual economy crumbled in the background. 5. Back to Niyazov in Turkmenistan, who treated the arts like a TV remote with a stuck-off button. After sitting through a performance he didn't quite vibe with, he concluded that ballet and opera weren't in the blood of his people. Rather than just not buying a ticket next time, he nuked the entire industry, shuttering the National Theater and firing everyone. It's the ultimate heckle. I don't get this dance, so now it's illegal for anyone to ever see it again. 6. When Rafael Trujillo's daughter got married in the Dominican Republic, he didn't want a registry, he wanted a payout. He instituted a voluntary deduction where government employees had to surrender 10% of their salary to fund the festivities. It was the world's most aggressive GoFundMe, where the donate button was replaced by the secret police, and declining the invitation was basically a request for a prison sentence. 7. Enver Hoxha's paranoia wasn't limited to names, he also declared war on facial hair. Convinced that beards signaled either Islamic piety or decadent Western hippie vibes, he banned them entirely in 1975. The policy was enforced by officials carrying scissors who would literally assault men on the street for an emergency shave. It was a regime terrified that a goatee might spark a revolution, turning barbering into a branch of law enforcement. 8. Idi Amin's obsession with Scotland went far beyond tourism. It was full-blown cosplay. Despite having no connection to the place, he formed a Ugandan-Scottish pipe band, started wearing kilts, and officially added King of Scotland to his title. He even sent letters to Queen Elizabeth about it. It was international diplomacy treated as a confusing costume party, designed solely to troll the British Empire. He was basically the world's most powerful internet troll, except he did it with real armies and bagpipes. 9. Burma's general. Ne Win let his numerology obsession destroy an economy in seconds. Because an astrologer told him the number 9 was lucky, he demonetized all currency that wasn't divisible by 9. In a single stroke of superstitious madness, he wiped out the life savings of millions of people, turning cash into confetti. It's a terrifying reminder of what happens when fiscal policy is dictated by magic numbers rather than, math. 10. Mao Zedong decided that sparrows were stealing China's grain, so he launched a national campaign to exterminate them. The people succeeded, killing millions of birds, which sounded great until the locusts showed up. Without sparrows to eat them, the insect population exploded, obliterating crops and triggering a famine of horrific proportions. It was a masterclass in unintended consequences, proving that when a dictator tries to outsmart Mother Nature, the ecosystem usually punches back, hard. 11. The Dominican Republic's Rafael Trujillo acted less like a president and more like a toxic personal trainer. Disgusted by the expanding waistlines of his inner circle, he mandated a compulsory weight loss program for his entire cabinet. Ministers faced mandatory weigh-ins, and failure to shed pounds meant public humiliation or even prison time. In his regime, calories were crimes. He effectively turned the government into a high-stakes episode of The Biggest Loser, where the prize for winning was simply not being arrested for being chubby. 12. Jean Bedel Bokassa of the Central African Republic looked at the presidency and thought, boring. He wanted the full Napoleon experience. In 1977, he blew over $20 million, literally a third of the entire country's annual budget, on a cosplay coronation so lavish it would make a Kardashian blush. While his citizens starved, he sat on a 2-ton golden eagle throne, proving he didn't just want to rule the country. He was perfectly happy bankrupting it for a singular moment of diamond-encrusted vanity. 13. When baby Doc Duvalier inherited Haiti at 19, he held a referendum to legitimize his President for Life title. The official results were a statistical miracle. 2.4 million voted yes, and literally 0 voted no. Not one person slipped and hit the wrong button. He didn't just rig the vote, he insulted the laws of probability. It wasn't an election, it was a national attendance check where the only options were agree or vanish, turning democracy into a darkly comic farce. 14. Back to Turkmenistan's Niyazov, who decided that static monuments were for peasants. He commissioned a massive 40-foot gold-plated statue of himself to sit atop a giant arch. But here's the kicker. It was motorized to rotate 360 degrees every 24 hours. The goal? To ensure his face was always facing the sun. It was an engineering marvel built on pure ego, legislating that even the celestial bodies were required to maintain eye contact with him from dawn until dusk. 15. Idi Amin was the king of petty shade. In 1975, noticing Britain's economic struggles, he launched the Save Britain Fund. He urged Ugandans, citizens of a struggling developing nation, to donate their pennies to help the impoverished former colonial masters. It was a diplomatic slap in the face disguised as charity. He wasn't trying to help, he was using his own people's money to fund a global prank, effectively asking the victims of colonization to buy their colonizers a sandwich. 16. Romania's Nicolae Ceausescu hated the countryside so much he tried to delete it. Under his systematization policy, he planned to bulldoze half of the country's 13,000 villages because he found them primitive. His goal was to force everyone into soulless concrete apartment blocks. He wasn't urban planning. He was playing SimCity in disaster mode, destroying centuries of culture and community just because he preferred the aesthetic of gray concrete over green grass. 17. In North Korea, interior design is a matter of life and death. By law, every single home must display portraits of the leaders on a specific, empty wall. But you can't just hang them. You are issued a special cloth solely for the ritualistic dusting of these frames. Letting a speck of dust settle on the great leader isn't poor housekeeping. It's treason. It's a surveillance state tactic where your own living room wall is holding you hostage. 18. The Gambia's Yahya Jammeh decided medical degrees were overrated. In 2007, he announced he could cure AIDS with a bucket of herbal paste, some bananas, and prayer. He set up a clinic where he personally rubbed this goo on patients, ordering them to stop their actual life-saving medication. It was a healthcare program based entirely on delusion, proving that the most dangerous thing in a dictatorship isn't always the secret police. Sometimes it's a leader who thinks he's a wizard doctor. 19. Francisco Macias Nguema of Equatorial Guinea was a self-proclaimed sorcerer who thought magic trumped mechanics. When the capital's power plant needed maintenance, he banned the use of lubricating oil, insisting his magical powers would keep the turbines spinning. Unsurprisingly, physics won. The plant seized up and the city went black. It's the ultimate cautionary tale. You can outlaw free speech and political parties, but you cannot legislate away the coefficient of friction. 20. Saddam Hussein took narcissism to a biological level. To thank God for his survival, he commissioned a copy of the Quran, written not in ink, but in his own blood, 27 liters of it drawn over 2 years. The result is a book that is simultaneously a holy scripture and a biohazard. It sits in a vault today, creating a theological nightmare. It's too sacred to destroy, but too gross and forbidden to actually read. 21. When Romania faced food shortages, caused entirely by his own incompetence, Nicolae Ceausescu didn't send aid. He sent a diet plan. He launched the Rational Eating Program, creating a scientific committee to calculate exactly how few calories citizens needed to survive. It was the ultimate gaslighting maneuver, telling a starving population that they weren't hungry, they were just being mathematically optimized. He essentially tried to legislate away the sensation of an empty stomach. 22. Ceausescu was also terrified of the alphabet. In a move of supreme paranoia, he passed the Great Typewriter Act, requiring citizens to register their typewriters with the police like they were firearms. Owners had to submit sample pages annually so authorities could trace the font of any anonymous protest notes. It was a regime so fragile that a sternly worded letter was treated with the same severity as a bomb threat. 23. Enver Hoxha was the world's most expensive doomsday prepper. Convinced of an invasion that existed only in his head, he poured Albania's national budget into building 173,000 concrete bunkers. Instead of schools or hospitals, the landscape was littered with useless concrete mushrooms. It was a multi-billion-dollar paranoid delusion that left the country with a housing crisis, but plenty of places to hide from an enemy that never showed up. 24. Turkmenistan's Niyazov appointed himself the nation's dentist. Finding gold teeth tacky, he simply banned them. His official medical advice was for citizens to chew on bones to strengthen their teeth instead. It wasn't public health, it was aesthetic tyranny. He even banned lip-syncing at concerts, ensuring that if your teeth were real, your bad singing had to be too. 25. Nicolae Ceausescu's wife, Elena, wanted to be a genius without the hassle of studying. Despite barely understanding high school chemistry, she demanded to be recognized as a world-renowned scientist. She forced the country's top minds to write papers which were then published under her name. She built an entire academic career on plagiarism backed by the secret police, proving you really can get a PhD if your thesis advisor is holding a gun. 26. Libya's Muammar. Gaddafi wasn't content with just being a dictator. He wanted to be the next Henry Ford. He personally designed a car called the Libyan Rocket, claiming it was the safest vehicle on Earth. It featured a bizarre, pointed nose aimed at reducing collisions and was supposed to revolutionize the auto industry. Instead, it looked like a Honda Civic that had been stung by a giant bee. It remains a masterclass in what happens when you surround yourself with engineers who are too terrified to tell you that your sketches look ridiculous. 27. Muammar Gaddafi took his Green Book philosophy too literally. He mandated that every front door in Tripoli be painted green to show loyalty to his regime. It wasn't urban renewal, it was forced allegiance through home improvement. He turned the capital into a monotonous HOA nightmare where the only approved color palette was Dictator chic, and a red door was practically an act of war. 28. Building an ice palace in the desert is the definition of because I can. Niyazov ordered a massive skating rink built in Turkmenistan, where temperatures hit 100 degrees, just so desert kids could learn to skate. It was an environmental middle finger, burning massive amounts of energy to freeze water in a furnace, purely to satisfy the whimsical urge of a man who apparently missed winter. 29. Kim Jong-il was a film buff who took headhunting literally. Unhappy with North Korean cinema, he kidnapped a famous South Korean director and his actress ex-wife, holding them hostage to produce movies for him. They were forced to make a communist Godzilla knockoff called Pulgasari. It remains history's only known case of trying to improve production value via international felony. 30. In Cambodia, Pol Pot's criterion for identifying enemies of the state wasn't political affiliation, but optometry. He waged a brutal war on intellect, deciding that anyone wearing glasses was obviously an intellectual and therefore a traitor. Thousands were executed simply for being nearsighted. It was a regime where poor eyesight was a death sentence, and the only thing more dangerous than actually reading a book was looking like you were capable of it. 31. Papa Doc's paranoia extended to the canine world. Convinced a political rival had shape-shifted into a black dog to escape him, he ordered the extermination of every black dog in Haiti. It wasn't animal control, it was a massacre driven by the fear that a poodle might be plotting a coup. It's a stark reminder that when a dictator believes in magic, the consequences are very real. 32. Equatorial Guinea's Macias Nguema didn't trust banks, so he became one. He killed the central bank director, withdrew the entire national treasury in cash, and stuffed it into a bamboo hut in his home village. He literally dragged the economy into the swamp. It was fiscal policy by way of a squirrel hoarding nuts, proving that the safest place for a nation's wealth was apparently under the dictator's mattress. 33. Robert Mugabe turned graduation season into an endurance sport. Obsessed with appearing as the supreme intellectual, he insisted on personally capping every single university graduate in the country. He spent days shaking thousands of hands, turning academic achievement into a prop for his ego. It wasn't about the students, it was the Robert Mugabe show, featuring a diploma and a very long line. 34. Haiti's Papa Doc Duvalier decided being president for life wasn't enough. He wanted the heavenly promotion too. He actually rewrote the Lord's Prayer, replacing God with himself, and forced school children to recite it daily. It started with "Our Doc, who art in the National Palace." It wasn't just blasphemy, it was a level of narcissism that required divine intervention to fix. He essentially told the church, "Move over, I'm the deity now," proving that for a true megalomaniac, omnipotence is just the starting salary. 35. Turkmenistan's Sapir Murat Niyazov took Mama's boy to a legislative level. He decided the traditional word for bread was boring, so he legally renamed it Gurban Sultan Ece, his mother's name. It was a masterstroke of emotional blackmail, forcing the entire population to honor his family tree every time they made toast. Imagine walking into a bakery and having to order a sliced loaf of Mom. It's the kind of Oedipal complex that usually requires therapy, not a parliamentary decree. 36. For his wife Imelda's birthday, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos didn't buy flowers. He bought infrastructure. He built the San Juanico Bridge, a multi-billion-dollar testimonial of love, connecting to her tiny home province. It was an economic disaster with almost no traffic, paid for by the very people who were starving. He basically used the national treasury as his personal joint checking account to buy the world's most expensive and least useful birthday card. 37. Papa Doc Duvalier realized he didn't need a campaign manager if he had voodoo. He deliberately styled himself as Baron Samedi, the spirit of death. wearing dark suits and sunglasses to terrify rural audiences. It was a brilliant, twisted piece of political theater. Why bother with tax reform or infrastructure promises when you can just imply that you are a literal demon who will eat your opponent's soul? He turned governance into a horror movie where the monster always wins. 38. Zaire's Mobutu Sese Seko treated the evening news like his own personal sitcom intro. He mandated that every broadcast begin with a celestial animation of his head descending from the clouds like a god. It wasn't just a news lead-in. It was a nightly reminder that he was the center of the universe. He didn't want to report the news, he wanted to be the divine source of it, ensuring that before you heard about the weather, you had to acknowledge his face beaming down from the heavens. 39. In Cambodia, Pol Pot decided to fix the economy by simply deleting it. To achieve his Year Zero utopia, he abolished money overnight, blowing up the central bank and making commerce illegal. It wasn't a bold fiscal strategy, it was a reset button pressed by a madman. By destroying currency, he didn't create equality. He created total dependency, turning the simple act of buying rice into a capital offense and ensuring that the only valid currency left was absolute obedience to the state. 40. Albania's Enver Hoxha decided being a dictator wasn't invasive enough, so he appointed himself the nation's supreme baby namer. In a desperate bid for purity, he illegalized any name with religious or foreign roots, essentially telling parents that John and Maria were threats to national security. Families were forced to pick from a government-approved menu of Illyrian options, turning the state into the world's most aggressive and judgmental godparent, ensuring every playground roll call sounded exactly like a nationalist propaganda pamphlet. 41. Muammar Gaddafi claimed to be a feminist, but his version involved the Amazonian Guard, an elite force of female bodyguards. While he called it empowerment, it was actually a bizarre vanity project where he handpicked virgins to surround him at all times. It was a dictator's fantasy disguised as progressive policy, proving that for him, women's rights meant the right to be a heavily armed prop in his eccentric traveling circus. 42. When Kim Jong-il died in 2011, North Korea didn't just ask for condolences, they demanded a performance. Grieving became mandatory, and anyone who didn't cry hard enough, or whose tears looked insincere, faced months in a labor camp. State officials literally patrolled the streets, rating people's sobbing. It's the terrifying peak of dictatorship, when the state doesn't just own your labor and your home, but lays claim to your tears, punishing you for having the wrong emotional volume. 43. In the Dominican Republic, Rafael Trujillo treated the military rank structure like a toy chest. He appointed his 4-year-old son, Ramfis, to the rank of colonel, complete with a tiny custom uniform. It completely delegitimized the army, forcing hardened soldiers to salute a toddler who was still mastering potty training. It's the ultimate nepotism, skipping boot camp, because your dad runs the country and you look cute in a hat. 44. Romania's Nicolae Ceausescu didn't want a home, he wanted a zip code. To build his Palace of the People, he bulldozed a historic chunk of Bucharest, destroying churches and thousands of homes. The result is the world's heaviest building, a marble monstrosity with over 1,000 rooms. He starved his people to build a house so obscenely large that he and his wife could essentially play hide-and-seek for a decade and never find each other. 45. In Alexander Lukashenko's Belarus, losing your job wasn't just unfortunate, it was expensive. He enacted a tax on social parasites, sending government fines to anyone unemployed for more than 6 months. It's a logic that defies gravity, demanding money from the exact people who don't have any. It was the state shouting, "Get a job," and then charging you a fee for the privilege of not having one. 46. The first president of Equatorial Guinea, Francisco Macias Nguema, was so deeply insecure about his own lack of education that he banned the word intellectual. He didn't just dislike smart people, he outlawed the very concept of them. He closed national universities, destroyed libraries, and created a state where critical thinking was a capital offense. It's a chilling reminder that the dumbest person in the room is often the one most afraid of intelligence, and sometimes they're the one in charge. 47. Portugal's Antonio de Oliveira Salazar fought the Cold War in the vending machine. Terrified of American cultural influence, he banned Coca-Cola, viewing the fizzy drink as a symbol of moral decay. For years, Portugal was a soda desert, all because one man thought carbonation was a gateway drug to liberalism. It was a geopolitical stand taken against a beverage, proving that some dictators are less afraid of nuclear weapons than they are of high-fructose corn syrup. 48. Turkmenistan's Gurbanguly. Berdimuhamedov decided that the color black was bad luck, so he banned black cars from the capital. Police seized vehicles and held them hostage until owners paid to repaint them white or silver. It wasn't traffic safety, it was automotive superstition legislated at gunpoint. He effectively turned the national police force into an interior design crew, ensuring the streets matched his personal mood board. That's the thing about absolute power, it makes you weird. These weren't laws, they were tantrums with an army. Now, I need your honest, petty energy. If you were a dictator for one day and could outlaw one minor annoyance, like people chewing loudly or slow walkers, what would you send people to jail for? Confess in the comments. And if you enjoyed the madness, subscribe.